Hi everyone, welcome back. It's your friendly neighborhood biologist back, narrating some more slides since I got such rave reviews from the first ones. This time I'm going to tackle cellular respiration. There's probably going to be a couple of movies, probably a couple short ones and one longer one. Okay, so we're going to start with just a little introduction to cellular respiration here. So remember how to do this. Here we go. So the overall equation for cellular respiration, this process takes glucose and also needs oxygen. You break apart the glucose into carbon dioxide and water. But that's not the point that you do cellular respiration. The reason that you do cellular respiration, that you do this reaction, is actually this. This reaction, when you break down glucose in this way, releases energy, and that energy is then captured by the process that we're going to learn about, and that energy is used to turn ADP and P into ATP. That's the reason you do it. The whole point of breaking down glucose into carbon dioxide and water is to get the energy out of it, to then use that energy to make ATP. So the whole point of cellular respiration is the production of ATP. So what's going on here? So in this slide, we already know that there is energy or calories in food, and we let it out in our lab where we burnt the food and we saw the calories come out. So you can let the energy out of sugar, which these little squirrels are doing here, by burning it. And when you do that, the energy comes out all at once in a flame and heat and all this kind of stuff, and it's not very controlled. So that is one way to let energy out of food molecules. Not very practical in biology, very, very wasteful. It kind of leaks out everywhere and it's not very controllable. So instead, inside your cells, you kind of do the same thing in terms of breaking down sugar, but instead of doing it by combustion, by this one step kind of let it all out with heat kind of thing, instead you let the energy out bit by bit, and in a very controlled manner so that you can try and capture all of it. And so I like to think of this as imagining glucose, a molecule of glucose, as a bunch of grapes. So that molecule of glucose is held together by lots of covalent bonds. And those covalent bonds are pairs of electrons that are sealing or joining up all those atoms. Those electrons have energy in them. High energy. Remember, they were put there by the process of photosynthesis when the glucose was first glued together by the plant. So what we want to do is try and pluck out those electrons one by one. So imagine those electrons, those high energy electrons that are gluing the glucose together, are really big, fat, juicy, energy rich grapes. And what we want to do in this process is pluck out those juicy grapes one by one. Harvest the electrons from the glucose one by one. Once you've harvested all the electrons from the glucose, you've completely taken it apart, then you've got all these big fat juicy grapes, big fat juicy energy rich electrons that you can squeeze all the juice out, squeeze all the energy out, and use the energy to make ATP molecules. So that's my analogy. Imagine glucose as a big fat juicy bunch of grapes. It's not grapes, it's really big fat juicy rich energy rich electrons. And through this process of cellular respiration, we're going to pluck the electrons or the grapes one by one until we've got them all harvested. And then at the very end, we're going to squeeze them all, get all the energy out of them, and use that energy to assemble ATP molecules. It's much more efficient than just burning it like those squirrels. All right, so where does all this happen? This process of cellular respiration happens inside the cell in a couple of places. Because there are several steps to harvesting the electrons from glucose, this is a kind of complicated process where there's multiple parts to it, and the steps have names. The first step is called glycolysis. The second step is called the transition. The third step is called the citric acid cycle, or sometimes the Krebs cycle. And the last step is called the electron transport system, or the electron transport chain. So those are the four things: glycolysis, transition, citric acid cycle, ETS. Where do all these things take place? Pretty much all living cells do cellular respiration. plant cells and animal cells. So plant cells do photosynthesis as well. That's why they have these chloroplasts, but they also have mitochondria. And mitochondria is where most of this happens. So there's a mitochondria in a plant cell, there's a mitochondria in an animal cell. So both of these kinds of cells are going to be doing cellular respiration. Everything needs to make ATP, so everything needs to be able to do this process. However, the steps, glycolysis, transition, citric acid cycle, ETS, happens in different locations throughout the cell and the mitochondria. So, there's the mitochondria. Huh. All right, here's the mitochondria. We're looking up close and personal mitochondria. It's got a double membrane, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So it's again a double baggy wrapped organelle. The outer membrane is smooth, looks like a jelly bean. The inner membrane is kind of all stretched out and folded up. So it has a super long surface area. You can see it's all folded. To make it fit in, it has to kind of have these pleats. And then the very inside is full of liquid, and this is called the matrix. So you have the matrix, the inner membrane, then you've got the space here, which is called the intermembrane space, the space between the membranes, and then the outer membrane. That's the structure of the mitochondria. Over here we have a cell, and what we're seeing here is that the first process of cellular respiration is called glycolysis, and that happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. It has nothing to do with the mitochondria. But then the transition, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain, that all has to do with the mitochondria. So of those 4 steps, glycolysis is going to happen in the cytoplasm, transition, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain, they all have to do with the mitochondria. Okay, that's that slide right there. Once again, here we go. The names of the stages. In some textbooks, they say that cellular respiration is in 3 stages: glycolysis, citric acid cycle, ETS. I like to also call the transition a stage 2. So, I mean, I guess you can call it stage 1B. It's 3, it's 4, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to have to number the stages. I just wanted you to know them in order like this. All right, that's the end of this so far. So for the next video, I'm actually going to do a demo. I'm not going to use slides, so I will see you in a few minutes.